On this exact night last year, I was sitting inside a freezing, dead 2012 Honda Civic parked off Route 1 near Philadelphia, watching the snow bury my windshield while my bank account balance sat at $0.00, frozen by an IRS bank levy over a $22,500 tax debt. Tonight, as I write this, my automated digital asset portfolio quietly yields $4,500 every single month in pure passive income. My physical gold bullion rests safely in a private vault, and my total net worth just crossed the $48,000 mark. The system does not care about your tears, and it certainly does not care about your good intentions. If you are a foreign national living in the United States, working 70 hours a week on a permanent resident card, you quickly learn that the margin between building the American dream and being crushed by the administrative machinery of the IRS is razor thin. My name is Amberley Vance. Most people call me Amber. I am 30 years old. By day, I am a trained cosmetic chemist working in a private pharmaceutical laboratory in Philadelphia, mixing raw active ingredients, testing skin barrier absorption, and measuring chemical stability down to the exact milligram. By night and on weekends, I was a high-end nanny booked through Care.com and Urban Sitter, driving toddlers to private schools and preparing organic meals for wealthy families across the main line. I thought I was doing everything right. I held my green card for 5 full years without a single violation. I saved every dollar I could to file my N-400 application for naturalization, dreaming of the day I would finally raise my right hand and swear the oath of U.S. citizenship. But I had 2 fatal flaws that almost destroyed my life. First, I had a deep, irrational terror of the stock market, believing that any form of investing was just rich people gambling, so I kept every penny of my savings in a low-interest checking account, completely unaware that silent inflation was rotting my purchasing power day by day. Second, I was financially illiterate when it came to the brutal complexity of the United States tax code. To pay off $12,000 of medical bills from an emergency appendectomy last year, along with a $16,000 auto loan for the car I needed to transport children, I accepted cash off the books for my nanny work. When tax season arrived, I panicked and paid a cheap storefront tax preparer $300 to file my returns. That decision was the match that lit the fuse. The tax preparer made catastrophic errors. They misclassified my self-employment tax, ignored proper expense deductions, and left me exposed to a full federal audit. When the initial tax bill arrived from the Internal Revenue Service, I was so terrified that I immediately signed an IRS installment agreement to pay $200 a month. But 2 months later, when I transitioned between lab jobs, my paycheck was delayed by 9 days. I missed a single automated payment. The IRS system flagged my account as a defaulted payment without sending a second warning. Interest compounded daily under the federal statutory rate, failure to pay penalties stacked on top of failure to file penalties. Then came the notice that shattered my world. Because I had an unresolved, defaulted tax debt with the federal government, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services flagged my N-400 application. My citizenship request was denied on the grounds of lacking good moral character due to delinquent federal tax liabilities. To reopen my immigration file, pay the mandatory legal retainer for an immigration attorney, and clear the compounding penalties, I needed exactly $22,500 in cash. The deadline was set. I had exactly 60 days before the final immigration review hearing, after which my green card status would be formally reevaluated for revocation. I remember sitting in the cold conference room of a high-rise immigration law firm in downtown Philadelphia. The attorney, a man named Henderson, didn't even look up from his tablet as he flipped through my file. His voice was as flat as a marble countertop. He told me that without a full retainer of $5,000 up front and a certified tax clearance letter from the IRS showing a zero balance, my N400 was dead in the water. He said the IRS is an apex predator, and if I couldn't pay $22,500 in 60 days, I should start packing my bags because my credit score was already dipping below 480, making any personal loan or bank refinance completely impossible. I left his office with my knees trembling. The Philadelphia winter air hit my face like a wet towel soaked in ice water. I walked 3 miles to Fairmount Park just to avoid spending $2.75 on the subway. The sky was the color of bruised iron. I sat down on a freezing wooden bench near the snow-covered fountain, pulled my coat tightly around my neck, and let the tears spill over. 59 days left, 0 borrowing capacity, a destroyed credit score, a $22,500 debt clock ticking second by second. I was sobbing so quietly into my scarf that I didn't hear the crunch of snow behind me. An elderly man carrying a worn leather bag and a classic DSLR camera with a fixed 35mm lens stopped near the bench. He looked at me with calm, piercing gray eyes beneath a thick woolen cap. His name was Arthur, a 68-year-old retired commercial event photographer who lived in the neighborhood. Arthur didn't offer me cheap pity. He sat on the far end of the bench, pulled out a small metal flask of warm tea, and listened as I spilled out my pathetic story in a broken, desperate rush. When I finally stopped talking, wiping my red eyes, Arthur didn't talk about tax lawyers or bankruptcy court. Instead, he reached out his hand and asked to see my smartphone. 10 minutes earlier, while watching the nanny children play before the cold set in, I had snapped a series of candid photos on my phone. Arthur scrolled through the gallery in silence. His thumb paused on photo after photo. He looked at the way I had framed the light bouncing off the frozen fountain, the hyper-focused depth of field, the razor-sharp color balance, and the genuine, unposed emotional expressions on the children's faces. Arthur turned to me and said something that changed my entire understanding of money. He told me that my background as a cosmetic chemist meant my brain was hardwired for extreme visual precision, light refraction, and structural detail, while my work as a nanny gave me intimate daily access to high-end lifestyle moments that advertising agencies would pay thousands of dollars to replicate. He said I was sitting on a mountain of raw, digital monetizable assets, but because I had the financial mindset of a wage worker, I was only selling my physical time for $15 an hour, while letting my actual value evaporate into thin air. That afternoon, in a small diner near the park over 2 cups of black coffee, Arthur revealed his 3-step financial engine for generating immediate cash flow, restructuring high-interest debt, and building long-term inflation-hedged wealth. Step 1 was short-term cash flow activation. Arthur explained that global media houses, pharmaceutical brands, and parenting platforms pay massive licensing fees every day for authentic, high-resolution commercial stock images. They didn't want fake, staged models in studio lighting anymore. They wanted raw, authentic, high-dynamic range photos of real families, child wellness, and scientific lifestyle care. Furthermore, by bundling my custom photo editing color presets into Lightroom presets, I could sell digital files directly to amateur photographers globally for $29 to $49 per download, with 0 marginal cost of production. Step 2 was the debt avalanche and capital allocation protocol. Every single dollar of active and passive cash flow generated would be split with mathematical rigidity using a modified budget.
50% sent directly to the IRS to slice down the high-interest tax debt principal, 30% locked into a bare-bones survival budget for rent and basic food, and 20% funneled toward my medical bills and legal retainer fees to safeguard my N-400 file.
Step 3 was long-term financial citadel building. Once the short-term crisis was resolved, the passive cash flow would be systematically deployed using dollar-cost averaging into broad market index funds like the S&P 500 through tax-advantaged accounts like a Roth IRA to harness the relentless power of compound interest while trashing the cash hoarding mindset by allocating 15% of profits into physical gold bullion as a permanent inflation hedge. Before we parted ways, Arthur pulled a small black SD card from his pocket and handed it to me. He said that inside that card were his proprietary search engine optimization keyword maps for global stock licensing platforms, along with 5 base Lightroom presets he had refined over 30 years. He told me the tools were worthless without ruthless execution, and walked out into the snow. I took the SD card, slid it deep into the dark lining of my coat pocket, and walked back to my small, damp basement apartment. But fear is a toxic master. When I got home, I looked at the looming stack of bills on my kitchen counter, panicked, and shoved the SD card into the bottom drawer of my desk. I convinced myself that Arthur was just an eccentric old man selling false hope. How could selling digital photographs for a few cents or dollars a license clear a $22,500 federal tax liability in less than 2 months? It felt like trying to extinguish a house fire with an eyedropper. 10 days passed in total paralysis. The clock was ticking. 49 days left. On the 11th morning, my phone rang. It was my previous immigration attorney. His voice was laced with thin, condescending pity. He told me he was officially closing my N-400 file because I hadn't received the $5,000 retainer. He warned me that the 60-day clock ran out, the IRS would issue a formal notice of levy to my employer, garnishing my laboratory wage by up to 75% while simultaneously sending a non-compliance report to immigration. He told me to start looking at flight tickets back to my home country before the process became humiliating. That phone call felt like a bucket of ice water poured directly down my spine. My stomach twisted into a hard, painful knot. 5 years of working double shifts, 5 years of missing holidays, 5 years of breathing toxic laboratory fumes and wiping noses for wealthy families, all about to be wiped out because I was too terrified to execute a plan. That night, at 2 in the morning, my hands shaking from cold coffee and sheer desperation, I pulled the SD card out of the drawer and inserted it into my old laptop. I opened Arthur's keyword maps. The data was astonishingly precise. It detailed exactly what high-paying corporate buyers were searching for on platforms like Getty Images, Adobe Stock, and Shutterstock during the winter quarter. High-resolution imagery showing child pediatric care, organic skin sensitivities, mineral sunscreen applications, and authentic family stress dynamics. I spent 48 hours straight without sleep. Using my smartphone and an old DSLR I borrowed from the lab, I spent my off hours taking hundreds of meticulous, highly detailed photographs during my nanny shifts with the full verbal permission of the families.
I edited them using Arthur's Lightroom presets, carefully calibrating the color science to highlight true-to-life skin textures, natural light refractions, and emotional depth. I uploaded 50 photos to 3 major stock licensing platforms, tagged them with the high RPM keywords from Arthur's list, and waited. Then came my first crushing failure. On day 15, I opened my contributor dashboard expecting to see sales. Instead, I was greeted with a wall of bright red rejection notices. All 50 photos had been rejected instantly by the platform moderators. The reason was a critical legal error. I had forgotten to attach signed model release forms for the children featured in the images. Under United States commercial law, you cannot license an image of an individual for commercial advertising without a legally binding signed waiver from the legal guardian. I had wasted 3 full days and nights. My account was flagged for administrative review, and I was dangerously close to being banned from the platforms altogether. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, looking out at the dirty snow melting against the basement window. A cold, bitter inner voice screamed at me, "Give up, Amber. You are just an immigrant laboratory worker. You don't understand American tax laws, you don't understand commercial property law, and you don't belong here. The IRS is going to strip your bank account bare, strip your green card, and send you back with nothing to your name." I buried my face in my hands and cried until my ribs hurt. But as the tears dried, a quiet, furious flame sparked inside my chest. I had spent 5 years proving my technical competence as a cosmetic chemist. I knew how to follow complex laboratory protocols down to the microgram. If legal compliance was just a protocol, I could master it. I wiped my face, downloaded standard American legal model release templates, and spent the next morning sitting down with the parents of the children I cared for. I explained my creative photography project with complete honesty. Because they trusted me and knew my work ethic, they willingly signed the legal releases. I re-uploaded 35 fully compliant, high-resolution commercial images along with my first set of custom Lightroom presets packaged specifically for mobile portrait photographers, priced at $39 per bundle. By day 25, the first trickle of active cash flow began. $9 from a medical blog licensing an image of a child's skin rash. $27 from an educational publisher licensing an image of home tutoring. Then a notification popped up on my phone. 3 downloads of my Lightroom preset bundle. Total earnings for the week, $187. It was a tiny sum compared to $22,500, but it proved one fundamental truth: the digital licensing mechanism worked.
I ramped up my production with military precision. Every single hour outside the laboratory was spent shooting, editing, keyword tagging, and uploading. I managed my time like an operational unit. By day 35, my digital asset portfolio had grown to 400 photos and 3 digital preset bundles. My daily income from stock royalties and preset sales hit $80 to $120 a day. Following step 2 of Arthur's system, I maintained a strict debt allocation model. I lived on instant noodles and black coffee, spending less than $30 a week on food. Every single cent of profit was immediately transferred into an escrow account designated for my IRS debt. My credit score was still crippled at 478, but my active cash flow was building momentum.
I felt like I was finally gaining ground in a race against an invisible executioner. Then, on day 40, the dark moment arrived, threatening to destroy everything I had built. It was a Tuesday evening during a severe Philadelphia ice storm. I received an urgent alert from my bank app. I opened it with cold fingers. The screen showed my main checking account balance, $0. The IRS had officially executed an automated bank levy. Without warning, the federal government had swept my entire savings account, locking away the $3,500 I had painstakingly accumulated over the last month to pay for my upcoming legal fees. Panicking, I ran out to my 2012 Honda Civic to drive to an emergency ATM to check if my credit card still worked. The roads were covered in a thick layer of black ice. Half a mile down Route 1, as the icy wind howled outside, a loud metallic bang echoed through the cabin. My front right tire blew out, sending the car sliding sideways into a snowbank. The engine made a sickening, gut-wrenching grind and died completely. The heating system cut out instantly. The cold air rushed inside the cabin. I sat there in the dark, my breath freezing into white mist in front of my face. I tried to turn the key, but the battery was completely dead. The tow truck fee alone would cost $200, money I did not have. My bank account was frozen, my cash was gone, my transportation was destroyed, and the IRS bank levy had rendered me entirely destitute in the middle of a blizzard. I wrapped my arms around myself, curling into a ball on the driver's seat. I listened to the freezing rain pelt against the glass. The countdown in my head was deafening. 20 days left until my immigration review. $0 in the bank, no car, no money for a lawyer, no way out. I was entirely, utterly defeated. I squeezed my eyes shut against the bitter cold inside that dead car, feeling the icy air seep through the floorboards. But as the shivers racked my body, my analytical mind, the brain trained in chemical reactions, physical properties, and strict laboratory diagnostics, suddenly cut through the panic like a scalpel. In chemistry, when a reaction fails, you do not cry at the beaker. You analyze the variables, isolate the error, and recalibrate the formula. Sitting in that freezing car, I realized I had been reacting like a victim instead of executing like a strategist. I reached into my bag, pulled out my smartphone with 7% battery remaining, and began reviewing my data. That was when my specialized background as a cosmetic chemist unlocked the cinematic twist that would change my entire destiny. 3 days prior, I had uploaded a specialized visual series showing close-up, high-resolution textures of real human skin reacting to chemical sunscreens versus mineral-based zinc oxide formulations. As a chemist, I knew that standard commercial sunscreens often caused micro-inflammation on sensitive skin, a topic gaining massive regulatory scrutiny in the U.S. cosmetic market. I had shot the series with clinical visual accuracy, capturing the exact light absorption, pore barrier dynamics, and natural skin textures. When I logged into my licensing dashboard on my dying phone, my heart stopped. A major American pharmaceutical and cosmetic conglomerate preparing a multi-million-dollar nationwide campaign for a new pediatrician-approved mineral sunscreen line had been scouring global stock databases for authentic, clinically precise visual assets. They didn't want artificial studio photos. They wanted raw, indisputable, high dynamic range chemical evidence of skin barrier protection. They had found my portfolio.
The corporate buyers had submitted an urgent inquiry through the platform's enterprise portal to purchase the commercial exclusive rights to my entire 8-photo skincare texture series. The buyout offer sitting in my inbox was exactly $18,000. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone in the dark. I tapped the screen with freezing fingers, accepted the corporate licensing contract, electronically signed the global rights transfer, and authorized the direct wire transfer. Equally crucial, my laboratory mindset sparked a second realization. I opened my digital tax records and reviewed the previous fraudulent tax return that had triggered the IRS audit. The cheap tax preparer had completely missed the mandatory standard mileage deductions and business expense write-offs I was entitled to as a mobile nanny driving hundreds of miles a week. The next morning, armed with my exact mileage logs, expense receipts, and proof of income, I walked directly into the local IRS Taxpayer Assistance Center in Philadelphia. I did not act like a frightened immigrant. I acted like a forensic auditor presenting undeniable data. I presented an amended tax return, Form 1040X, demonstrating that the original tax liability was mathematically incorrect. The IRS officer reviewed the raw mileage logs and chemical supply receipts, recalculated the figures on his terminal, and officially removed $4,000 in erroneous failure to pay penalties and overassessed principal. The true remaining balance wasn't $22,500, it was $14,500. And sitting in my enterprise royalty account was $18,000 in cleared corporate funds. By day 52, 8 full days before my absolute deadline, I authorized a wire payment directly from my digital licensing proceeds to the Internal Revenue Service, paying off every single cent of my outstanding federal tax debt. I received a certified IRS tax clearance letter showing a 0 balance and 0 delinquent liabilities. On day 60, I walked into the USCIS field office in Philadelphia for my rescheduled immigration interview. I handed the interviewing officer the official IRS tax clearance certificate, my updated credit file showing the removal of all tax liens, and my verified bank statement. 3 weeks later, I stood inside the historic federal courthouse, raised my right hand alongside immigrants from 50 different nations, and swore the oath of allegiance. I walked out of that room as an American citizen, holding my naturalization certificate in my hands. 6 months after that dark night in the snowstorm, my entire life had been completely restructured. I built an emergency fund of $10,000 placed safely in a high-yield savings account. My automated stock portfolio and Lightroom preset store were producing a reliable $4,500 a month in pure passive cash flow. My credit score bounced back to a pristine 740. Today, 1 year later, my net worth stands at $48,000. I paid off every dollar of my $12,000 medical debt and cleared my auto loan completely. I officially resigned from my nanny gig to open my own independent cosmetic visual R&D and brand imagery studio in Philadelphia. Following the final step of Arthur's system, my wealth building is now completely automated. Every month, a portion of my digital asset cash flow is systematically deployed via dollar-cost averaging into broad market S&P 500 index funds within my Roth IRA, allowing compound interest to compound over time without tax drag. To ensure my citadel remains unbreakable against rising inflation, 15% of my net income is converted directly into physical gold bullion, stored securely in a private bank vault as an ultimate asset preservation hedge. If my journey taught me anything, it is this. True financial power has nothing to do with a corporate job title with a legal status stamped on your paper documents. Real power is the ability to take your specialized knowledge, package it into scalable digital assets that generate continuous cash flow, and use that cash flow to build a financial citadel so strong that no corporate system, no sudden crisis, and no tax audit can ever tear it down.